Close your eyes and imagine a British classroom from 1950. The teacher calls roll. Beryl? Phyllis? Norman? Cyril? Heads turn, hands raise, voices answer. Present, miss. Now imagine that same scene today. Those names have vanished. Completely disappeared. You won't find a single Beryl in a modern British primary school. Not one Norman under the age of 60. Names are time capsules. They capture the spirit of an era, reflect cultural values, and then, sometimes quite suddenly, they fade away. Today, we're exploring 20 British names that once filled every classroom, appeared on every register, and echoed through every playground. Names that were as common as William and Charlotte are today. But now, they've become relics. Forgotten. Gathering dust in old photographs and yellowed birth certificates. I'm your host, and this is a journey through British naming history. Let's discover what happened to the Ediths, the Herberts, the Joyces, and the Directs of yesteryear. Let's start with the girls. These are names that once defined British femininity, that appeared on classroom walls and in every family tree. Names your great-grandmother might have had, or her sisters, her cousins, her school friends. Number 1, Doris. Doris. In the 1920s and 30s, you couldn't walk into a British classroom without meeting at least 2 girls named Doris. It peaked in 1924 when it was the 5th most popular girl's name in England and Wales. The name comes from ancient Greece, the Doris region, and means gift. But by the 1960s, it had acquired a different association. It became a stereotypical name for working-class women, particularly tea ladies and cleaning staff. This class association killed the name. In 2023, fewer than 3 babies in the entire UK were named Doris. Number 2, Barbara. Barbara dominated the 1930s and 40s. It means foreign or strange in Greek, but there was nothing strange about its popularity. It was sophisticated, international. Think Barbara Stanwyck, the Hollywood star. But Barbara suffered from what linguists call generational exhaustion. When every girl's aunt, teacher, and neighbor was named Barbara, parents wanted something different. By the 1980s, it had virtually disappeared from birth registers. Today, Barbara is exclusively a grandmother's name. Number 3, Phyllis. Phyllis was everywhere in the 1910s and 20s. It's Greek, meaning foliage, or green bough, a nature name before nature names were fashionable. But Phyllis had a fatal flaw: pronunciation problems. Is it Phyllis or Phyllis? The ambiguity frustrated people. Combined with its old-fashioned sound, Phyllis quietly vanished. The last time it appeared in the top 100 was 1934. Number 4, Beryl. Beryl was a gemstone name, like ruby or pearl, that peaked in the early 20th century. It was elegant, unusual, nature-inspired. So why did it disappear? Partly because of comedy. British sitcoms in the 1970s and 80s frequently used Beryl as a joke name for frumpy, middle-aged women. Once a name becomes comedic shorthand, it's nearly impossible to revive. No parent wants their daughter to share a name with a punchline. Number 5, Edith. Edith is Old English, meaning prosperous in war. It was massively popular in Victorian and Edwardian Britain, ranking in the top 20 for decades. But Edith suffered from what demographers call the grandmother gap. Names go through cycles. They're popular, then they become parent names, then grandmother names, then they're rediscovered. Edith is stuck in the grandmother phase. Though there are tiny signs of revival, vintage names are trendy. It hasn't recovered yet. Number 6, Joyce. Joyce was originally a male name, believe it or not. It comes from a Breton saint, Saint Judoc. But by the early 1900s, it had become exclusively feminine in Britain. Joyce peaked in the 1920s, when it represented modernity and independence. Think of the author James Joyce, Though he was Irish and male, the literary connection helped. But by the 1960s, Joyce sounded dated. The last Joyce to make the top 100 was in 1954. Number 7, Maureen. Maureen is the anglicized version of Marin, Irish for Little Mary. It exploded in popularity in the 1930s and 40s, partly due to the actress Maureen O'Sullivan. But Maureen had an image problem. It became associated with a specific generation of Irish immigrant women in Britain. As immigration patterns changed and Irish names like Aoife and Saoirse became fashionable, Maureen was left behind, too common to be exotic, too ethnic to be mainstream. Number 8, Sheila. Another Irish import, Sheila comes from Cyril, the Irish form of Cecilia. In the 1930s through 50s, Sheila was wonderfully popular, friendly, approachable, feminine. Its downfall? In Australia, Sheila became slang for woman or girl, often with condescending connotations. In Britain, the name became comic. By the 1970s, Sheila was finished. Number 9, Pamela. Pamela was actually invented by the poet Sir Philip Sidney in the 16th century for his work, Arcadia. It lay dormant for centuries, then exploded in the 1940s and 50s. Why did it die? Nicknames. Pamela became Pam, and Pam sounded brisk, efficient, unglamorous. When parents started choosing names that couldn't be shortened, or that had prettier nicknames, Pamela lost its appeal. Number 10, Sandra. Sandra is a diminutive of Alexandra, and it had a brief moment of glory in the 1950s and 60s. It was the name, modern, American-sounding, fresh. But Sandra's popularity was its downfall. It became too common, too ordinary. By the 1980s, every office had multiple Sandras, and parents wanted uniqueness. Sandra collapsed almost overnight. These names, Doris, Barbara, Phyllis, Beryl, Edith, Joyce, Maureen, Sheila, Pamela, and Sandra, once defined British girlhood. Now they exist only in memory, in old class photographs, and the stories our grandparents tell. But what about the boys? Male names follow different patterns than female names. They tend to be more stable, more traditional. But even the most solid names can crumble. Number 11, Norman. Norman literally means Northman, a reference to Vikings. It became popular after the Norman conquest of 1066, faded, then roared back in the Victorian era when historical names were fashionable. Norman peaked in the 1920s and 30s. It was strong, solid, dependable. But by the 1960s, it sounded stodgy and old-fashioned. The cultural shift toward informality killed Norman. Today, it's virtually extinct in British classrooms. Number 12, Derek. Derek comes from an old German name meaning ruler of the people. It had a spectacular run from the 1930s through the 1960s. It was consistently in the top 20. Derek's problem was cultural association. It became synonymous with a specific type of working-class British masculinity, reliable but unglamorous. As parents aspired to more sophisticated names, Derek fell out of favor. By the 1990s, it had vanished from the top 100. Number 13, Cyril. Cyril is Greek meaning lordly. It was popular in the early 20th century, associated with intellectuals and artists. Cyril Connolly, the writer and critic, kept the name in the public eye. But Cyril suffered from phonetic problems. It sounds quite similar to sterile, an unfortunate association. Comedy programs mocked the name as weak and effeminate. By the 1960s, no parent was choosing Cyril. Number 14, Ernest. Ernest means serious or determined in German. It was hugely popular in Victorian Britain. Oscar Wilde even wrote, "The importance of being earnest," though spelled differently. Ernest represented Victorian values: earnestness, sincerity, hard work. When British culture rebelled against those values in the 1960s, Ernest became a casualty. It now sounds comically old-fashioned. Number 15, Herbert. Herbert is Old German for Bright Army. It was the top 20 name for decades in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Herbert's downfall was its nickname, Herb. In British slang, herb sounds weak and unmanly. Unlike in America, where Herb could seem friendly, in Britain it was an insult. Parents abandoned Herbert in droves after World War II. Number 16, Clarence. Clarence comes from the Duke of Clarence, a royal title. It was aspirational. Parents chose it hoping their sons would seem distinguished. But Clarence became a victim of changing class attitudes. By the mid-20th century, it sounded pretentious rather than distinguished. The name also suffered from American associations. Clarence was often used for comedic or awkward characters in films. It disappeared rapidly after 1950. Number 17, Colin. Now, Colin is interesting because it hasn't completely disappeared, but it's fallen dramatically. In the 1960s and 70s, Colin was everywhere. It's the anglicized version of the Scottish name Colleen, meaning young pup. Colin's decline is generational. It became so associated with one specific generation of British men that younger parents couldn't imagine it on a baby. It sounds like a middle-aged IT professional, not a newborn. Colin is in limbo, too recent to be vintage, too dated to be current. Number 18, Nigel. Nigel comes from the Latin Nigellus, meaning little black one, or dark. It was refined, upper middle class, sophisticated, the name of choice for aspirational families in the 1950s and 60s. But Nigel became a parody of itself. It represented a certain type of stuffy, overly proper Englishman. Pop culture mocked it mercilessly. By the 1980s, Nigel was comedy gold, which meant it was dead as a baby name. Number 19, Trevor. Trevor is Welsh, meaning large settlement. It rode the wave of Celtic names becoming fashionable in England during the mid-20th century. Trevor's problem was sound. The Trev sound became associated with a very specific British archetype, the middle-class, slightly dull everyman. It lost its Welsh exotic appeal and became ordinary. By the 1990s, Trevor had fallen out of the top 100. Number 20, Leslie. Our final name, Leslie, or Leslie, was actually unisex, though more common for boys. It's Scottish, from a place name meaning Garden of Hollies. Leslie fell victim to gender shifting. As it became increasingly popular for girls, spelled Leslie, parents stopped using it for boys. Names that become feminine rarely return to masculine use in British culture. By the 1970s, Leslie was effectively dead for boys and declining for girls. Norman, Derek, Cyril, Ernest, Herbert, Clarence, Colin, Nigel, Trevor, and Leslie. These names built Britain. They belonged to soldiers, factory workers, teachers, doctors, fathers, and sons. They represented British identity across decades. And now they're gone. So why do names disappear? Why do perfectly good names, names with history, meaning, and beauty, suddenly become unbearable to new parents? There are patterns. Names die when, first, they become too common. When everyone has the same name, it loses specialness. This killed Sandra, Barbara, and Derek. Second, they acquire negative associations. Comedy characters, stereotypes, or unfortunate slang can murder a name. This destroyed Beryl, Sheila, and Nigel. Third, they sound outdated. Language evolves. Sounds that seemed sophisticated in 1920, like Phyllis or Cyril, sound clunky now. Fourth, they hit the grandmother gap. Names need about 100 years to cycle back into fashion. Edith and Ernest are still waiting. Fifth, cultural values change. Names representing Victorian earnestness or post-war conformity don't fit modern British identity. But here's the fascinating thing: names can be resurrected. Look at Florence, Ada, and Arthur, all dead names that have roared back into fashion. Alfie was a grandfather name in the 1980s. Now it's topping the charts. Could Doris return? Could Norman? Maybe not tomorrow. But naming is cyclical. In 2050, some daring British parent might look at their newborn daughter and think, "You know what? You look like a Phyllis." These 20 names, Doris, Barbara, Phyllis, Beryl, Edith, Joyce, Maureen, Sheila, Pamela, Sandra, Norman, Derek, Cyril, Ernest, Herbert, Clarence, Colin, Nigel, Trevor, and Leslie, tell the story of 20th century Britain. They represent ambitions, values, and identities that shaped generations. They filled classrooms. They appeared on roll calls. They were shouted across playgrounds and whispered in classrooms. And now they're memories. Beautiful, forgotten memories, preserved in photographs and stories and family trees. But they mattered. Every Doris, every Norman mattered. They lived lives, raised families, built communities. Their names might be forgotten, but their legacy isn't. Thank you for listening. And maybe, just maybe, next time you meet an Edith or a Derek, remember, you're meeting history.